What are your plans for the housing bill, Mr. President?
I don't know. I think it's so unimportant by compared to the Save America Act. Here's what I would like to say. Much more than a bill, that big deal. It's a yawn. Some people say it's wonderful. To me, compared to the Save America Act, just about everything is a big yawn.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in New York, and I'm Jackie Alamany in for Nicole Wallace. Despite his claims to the contrary, billionaire Donald Trump doesn't seem to care about the needs of the American people. Because when given the chance to make things better, like making homes more affordable, he chooses not to. What he described there as a big yawn was a bill that passed with bipartisan support, a rarity these days, that would help make the housing market more accessible to everyday Americans. Trump did not sign it, saying he wouldn't do so unless Republicans passed the SAVE Act, a controversial bill that gives the federal government more control over elections. That was 10 days ago, and Trump still has not signed the housing bill. Unless he actually vetoes it, the legislation will quietly go into effect tonight, even without a signature. Trump has been putting his fragile ego and pettiness over his 2020 election loss ahead of legislation that would actually help American lives. And it's remarkable because Trump could actually take credit for a legislative win here. And yet, he isn't. As opposed to when he took credit for something that isn't even his doing. Earlier this week, Trump said on social media that Walmart would be lowering prices, specifically beef prices, and that they were doing so at his administration's request. Yet reporting from our colleague Catherine Rampel in The Bulwark finds, in Walmart's case, a spokesperson that the retailer began one of its regular price rollback events earlier last week, i.e. the week before Trump blasted out his claim that price cuts were imminent and would be happening at his request. So, an out-of-touch Trump is where we begin this hour. Political analyst and host of the Bulwark podcast, Tim Miller, is here. Also with us, Media Matters for America, Angelo Carusone. And with me at the table, Democratic strategist and Columbia University professor, political analyst Basil Smikle, plus founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, is here. She's here despite the traffic and despite just running down 43rd Street. So for that, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, World Cup.
What is your assessment of what is going on here? I think we've heard a lot of different takes that the president's primary impetus and motivation here is to hang on to the Republican Party and that his control over the party is ultimately more important to him than anything. But I feel like after we've seen his financial disclosure last week, crypto returns amounting to $3.8 billion, that there's something else going on here. What's your take on all of this?
Well, first of all, aside from the irony of him referencing yawning on virtually any topic, that seems like a bad call considering how often he's falling asleep in the middle of critical meetings. But look, it starts to feel like actually he really does mean it, that at this point he has so little filter left that he doesn't care about the housing bill. And I think it's in part because he didn't do it. It was a Senate and a House that came together despite him to solve problems for the American people. And increasingly, it starts to look like if he didn't shape it, if he didn't call for it, if he didn't own it from beginning to end, which he feels that he did with the SAVE Act, that he wants nothing to do with it. And he doesn't seem to really care whether it affects the American people or not. And housing, of all things, this is the construction president. He's supposed to love this. But he's so focused on his own house, well, the one that is his house for now, his temporary home, and remodeling it. He doesn't seem to worry very much about the rest of America.
And Angelo, for all the conversations that you and I have had over the influence and the way that critics of Donald Trump are actually able to permeate and get through to his supporters when they disagree with what the president is doing. And that trickle-down effect, sometimes being quite slow. It seems like this issue is something that is actually resonating with voters, with 60% of voters disapproving of Trump's handling of the economy and 33% approving, his lowest rating ever on this question. Why is this resonating more than anything else?
You can't ignore it. You can't lie your way out of it. You can't tell, you can't do this sort of fake performance and hope people sort of pick up onto the story you're telling. because they're living the reality. It's impossible to disconnect the prices, and in particular gas prices, from from their day-to-day reality, and that's the big part of this. And it's worth noting two things: that one, they spent quite a lot of time under the Biden years explaining and socializing to their audience the connective relationship between gas prices and every other thing in their lives. I mean, they really built that connective tissue as a media ecosystem. It wasn't just Trump. It was the larger right-wing media apparatus that he relies on now. And so the audience is already baked into and to understand the relationship that gas does going to have an effect on my day-to-day life. The other thing to consider, and you can hear that playing out in the callers. I always like to listen to what the callers say, and they're calling in to complain about this. In talk radio and Megyn Kelly's show, across the board, it is clearly penetrating the audience. On the other hand, and this is the warning sign, a lot of the personalities, and that's the thing Trump is listening to, are saying, do the performance. Go after the Republican Party for not doing enough to push the SAVE Act. And I think that's the real tell here, because Trump has already decided that he can't get the voters. So he's going to orient the next couple of months to getting the votes. And that means manipulating the election in one way, shape, or form. So at the end of the day, he doesn't really care about people because he's actually going after something quite different.
But Basil, is there a world in which if this president decided to act like a normal president and campaign on policies such as the housing bill that is going into effect tonight, and maybe some of the other wins, small wins, at least if you are talking to Democrats, but still wins nonetheless, that he has decided to skim over or at least cloud with his lack of message discipline, that the president wouldn't need to be forcing the SAVE Act down lawmakers' throats right now and wouldn't need to be finding these other ways to exert control over an election that he seems destined to lose right now.
Well, it's interesting because any other president, and in fact, any other speaker would do everything they needed to do to protect their members. That's what they do, right? They would create legislation, sign legislation. What's interesting is that legislatively, he's not doing that, but, they are having a midterm convention in Texas this year. And the reason that that's important is because it's less about policy and more about, I want the accolades, I want the adulation to try essentially and run again when he can't run again. But let me speak a little bit about the legislation itself.
Yeah.
Because there are two pieces to this. The SAVE Act is a really draconian act. But the fact that so many people feel that their votes might be disenfranchised, that they may be disenfranchised, that their vote might not count, is actually, in my view, pushing an overperformance of Democrats because they want to make sure that their votes count, given what's coming out of D.C. On the flip side, the Housing Act is critically important because it gets rid of the private equity and institutional investors in housing that are buying up large amounts of property. It's actually making, in many ways, housing more affordable, particularly in the suburbs that are 5-6 times now the cost, 5-6 times the cost of the median income. That's important because Democrats see this bill as an opportunity for affordable housing. Republicans see it as an opportunity for reduced regulation and construction. There's something for everybody, and he chose not to sign it.
Yeah, and also we should note that the latest attempt to jam the SAVE Act through at any sort of expense is the recent decision, the decision he made yesterday to fire the commissioners from the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission. But Tim, I didn't forget about you. Let's talk about Hakeem Jeffries' take on what's going on here. He posted on X, Republicans would rather make it harder to vote than easier to afford a home. When people show you who they are, believe them. Is this the right message from Democrats on this eve of the housing bill going into effect?
I think it's related to the right message. I'm not going to nitpick every tweet Hakeem Jeffries sends. I mean, there's some that hit a little harder than others. But I think it's important just to kind of keep the pressure on Trump. I think that the Democrats, for me, I think that the best message they have kind of is this umbrella message about what we were talking about at the beginning of the segment, which is Donald Trump like caring more about his house than theirs, and kind of tying corruption to, you know, the economic struggles that regular people are facing. And Donald Trump's made that very easy for them, because he says over and over again that he's bored by the housing question, and he has obviously, I think it's obvious to anyone paying attention that his focus is on the remodeling of the White House and you know, the Kennedy Center and the marble armrests, and like, this is what he cares about. He doesn't care about making things better, more affordable for people. He calls that a hoax, the idea that affordability is an issue. So I just think if the Democrats can kind of have a two birds with one stone thing here, where they can go after him on his corruption, and also just talk about how that money that he's wasting and using in D.C. is like not going to help their lives. Like, they're not getting a new, you know, a new room in their school or a new room in their hospital. Trump's getting a new room at the White House, and I think that's the right message for them. The other funny thing about this for the Democrats, Jack, and you talked a lot of, you know, in your reporting, the Republicans, you know, my old people, the more mainstream kind of the old guard Republicans, and oftentimes over the years they've said, hey, we can't buck Trump on this stuff. We can't vote against tariffs. We can't vote for Ukraine funding because Trump's too powerful. You know, we don't want to lose our seat. Like, it's a political imperative that you stick around with Trump because Trump's so powerful. I find it very funny and ironic that, like, by accident on this housing bill, they bucked Trump because they didn't know that he was going to have this temper tantrum over the SAVE Act. And look at what happened. This thing's going to go into effect at midnight because Trump's not going to veto it. There's a bipartisan veto-proof majority. All Trump's going to do is whine about it on social media. None of these Republicans are going to lose their jobs over it. Like, we've spent 10 years being told that they can't have a backbone, they can't demonstrate any courage because they're worried that they'll lose their seat if they do. And here we see on the housing bill that actually this whole time they could have. Like, Trump's not as strong as they think.